Beneva, who is the Executive Director of Abundant Housing Massachusetts.
As Jen said, my name is Jesse Benenada, the Executive Director at Abundant Housing Massachusetts. It's great to see all of you here today. I see some familiar faces and then a lot of faces that are new to me. That's fantastic to see. I want to just take a couple minutes to sort of tell you a little bit more about Abundant Housing, who we are, and then set a little bit of the context for the conversation today. So Abundant Housing Massachusetts is a statewide pro-housing advocacy organization. Our motto is simply put that Massachusetts is for everyone. We believe that every community in Massachusetts should be open and welcoming to all, regardless of race or income, age or ability or any other number of life circumstances or experience. And that's not the reality in many communities across Massachusetts. You know, we are gravely concerned that many communities, particularly outside of the city, use what we call exclusionary zoning to limit the types of homes that can be built and made available in their borders, and that has the direct impact of limiting who actually can live in that community. It drives segregation. It forces new development to just a few areas, which also then exacerbates gentrification and displacement in those areas. And so we're very concerned about that situation. We're trying to address that in a holistic manner, looking at the entire state of Massachusetts, and we do it in a couple key ways. You know, we recognize that here in Massachusetts, local decisions about land use, planning, and development, zoning, they're all made on the local level. Every 351 cities and towns in our state have their own zoning boards or planning boards. They make their own decisions almost in a vacuum about what can be built in their borders and who has access to live in those communities. And so we recognize that in order to build up a variety of housing choices in more communities across the state, we need activists on the ground who are willing to show up at their city council, their town meeting, their planning boards, and fight for good projects and fight to overcome the restrictions of exclusionary zoning in their community. So that's really our first focus, is building up that base of grassroots pro-housing advocates. We do that through our membership, over 350 individuals around the state, in particular the concentration in the greater Boston region, and about a dozen, slightly over a dozen organizations like Dorchester Growing Together, which are affiliates of Abundant Housing Massachusetts. But while we focus on the local level, we also recognize the importance of state action. While local decisions are made in that local, hyper-local level around the state in each community, state law does govern how communities plan and zone. And so we, have made important strides in Massachusetts in recent years. Folks may be familiar with the MBTA Communities Law that will require 177 cities and towns around Boston, really from Worcester to Boston, with the exclusion of Boston, to have zoning for multifamily housing near transit in their communities, where multifamily housing is allowed as of right. That's a real important step that the state has taken to say, towns, you cannot keep apartment buildings and the diversity of life experience and residents that comes with that from your borders. And so that's a real important step that the state has taken, but we want to make sure that the state does more. That law only impacts the greater Boston region. It doesn't actually have direct impact in the city of Boston. It doesn't impact the Cape, for instance, where there's a housing crisis, or Western Mass and Central Mass, where there is also a growing housing affordability crisis. So we continue to focus on advocacy at the state level as well, while building up that base of grassroots pro-housing activists. In the packets that you were all given at registration, there is some more information about Abundant Housing. There's a fact sheet just about who we are and our philosophy. And it's also followed by another fact sheet about our state legislative priority, House Bill 1379, Senate Bill 858, which is an act to promote Yes in My Backyard, which is a comprehensive zoning reform bill that will impact communities across the state, encourage them to build, zone for and build more multifamily homes, accessory dwelling units, prioritizing affordable housing and disposition of state-owned land, and a number of other real important actions on the state level. As you may have heard Governor Healy talk about, it's time for communities to step up and do more, and so that's what our bill is trying to do. Before I turn it over to our first panel, I do want to talk for a couple quick seconds that while we have this statewide focus and the statewide bill that we're advocating for, Boston is critical in this conversation as well as the population center of Massachusetts. Even though we're not like some cities around the country where it's exclusively single-family zoning within our borders, there is more that Boston can do. We have a challenge where every new apartment building going up needs many variances. It's incredibly expensive. It's time-consuming. It actually drives up the cost of homes that are built in Boston and making them less affordable for more people in our borders. And so that's part of the conversation that we want to have today. We're first going to hear from a really great panel of Dorchester Growing Together and some other Abundant Housing Massachusetts affiliate organizations about what does it mean to advocate and organize a pro-housing group in your own community. We'll then turn it over to a panel of developers to talk about really why is it so challenging and expensive to build the homes, the affordable homes that we desperately need in and around Boston. And then we'll close out with a proposal for all of you that folks from the Abundant Housing Boston Committee have been working on to address the zoning restrictions that still exist here in the city of Boston and the ways that we think we can make zoning more equitable and accessible so that we're building more affordable homes for people of all income levels across the city in all neighborhoods of Boston. And so I'm really excited for this conversation today. So I think that's probably enough for me. The last thing, if you like what you hear today and you're not already a member, Abundant Housing Massachusetts is a membership organization. As I said, we have over 350 individuals who have joined. I would invite you to join us as an AHMA, as we call ourselves for short, an AHMA member. But take a listen to our conversation today, and I hope that excites you into action. So thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon.
So I'll invite the first panelist up, Becca Schofield. No, here's your boys. Jeff and Steve, come on up and join me. So our format is really tight tonight. We have some time after the three pieces for some on-the-ground networking and one-on-one questions, and then reminding everyone that we also have a patio at the Byrnes Reserve for after, which is about a 12-minute walk, 4-minute car ride from here near Fields Corner Station. So this first panel is made up of 4 representatives of different neighborhood level pro-housing groups in Boston. And we're going to, in series, starting with Becca, who's in the most mature, oldest of groups among us. Each panelist will introduce their organization's profiles and discuss for 10 minutes each membership, your family, your structure, and highlight recent accomplishments and your biggest challenges.
My name is Becca Schofield. Is this better? Yeah. So I'm a co-chair of Better Cambridge, or ABC, which was founded by Jesse way back when Central Square was going through traditional rezoning. And so ABC's really always been focused on advocating for important developments in the city of Cambridge, making sure that housing advocates are able to show up at planning board meetings, zoning board meetings, to city council to really tell people what they care about in their housing. So I've been involved since about 2018, and I just want to kind of describe quickly, ABC is really focused on being a more representative and democratic community all-volunteer group. So while we have a core board, we also have a steering committee which makes the majority of strategic decisions for ABC, and it's really straightforward for any member to get involved, pick some projects, join steering committee, like become part of ABC leadership. We really care about that. And then we've been on the forefront of advocating for the Affordable Housing Overlay, which was passed in 2019, which was first of its kind really in the nation, and has also been the catalyst for similar affordable housing overlays in other cities and towns. So essentially it's a density boost for any development that is 100% affordable, which is a really exciting opportunity in a city where there's not a lot of affordability and it's really hard for developers to compete. Some of the other things that we've been working on that we're also excited about that have really shifted the conversation around zoning and development, people saying they're pro-housing, saying they want density, is the Missing Middle Housing Campaign, which was a citizens petition, which while it didn't pass, really did give City Council lots to chew on and start a broader conversation around ending exclusionary zoning. We were part of advocating for ending parking minimums, which recently passed, bumping linkage fees, which puts more money into the affordable housing pocket, and just broadly really focusing on how we get more money into campaigns to support tenants' rights, to support deeper affordability, to support higher density, and more transit-oriented development. So that's kind of our vibe. Many challenges associated with that, I'm sure other people can echo, but yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, you have to live outside of this.
Okay.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the way you get out to the community,
Sure.
your website,
Yeah, that's one of the hardest parts of an all-volunteer organization, because you're like, which of our volunteers actually has marketing and communication experience, which I'm sure resonates. So we definitely do a monthly newsletter, regular action alerts when there are developments we care about or issues that we think are particularly important. We often have a template on how to comment on city council for housing-related developments or development kind of policies, issues, citizens petitions, stuff that feels aligned with our mission and something we're invested in. We do Renters Matter campaigns. A big part of our platform is really getting renters and folks that are less represented in just Cambridge politics at community meetings in general, giving them a voice at the city level. So we do a lot of outreach that way. We'll flyer at T stations, we'll do some texting. It really kicks up to here in election season, where the ABC political arm, which is a separate organization, will, really door knock hard for pro-housing candidates and try to get a slate elected onto Cambridge City Council. So that's been a way that we do outreach. It's really, really hard. And I think while elections are an opportunity to do that, we're also very focused on keeping people involved week to week, month to month, because it takes some really consistent volunteer efforts for, number one, volunteers to understand how to talk about housing in a way that makes sense to them and helps them connect to their neighbors and really spread that message effectively. And, number two, see things through and get really excited about having initiatives that they were focused on bear fruit and get more support and eventually pass, because this work takes a long time. It's really iterative, it can be really frustrating. So we kind of throw everything we can at recruitment, but it is one of the biggest challenges. And as I'm sure a lot of folks here know, if you've been to community meetings, they're really tough. They're long, and it's hard for a lot of folks to participate. It's very majority older, whiter, wealthier homeowners. So for us to really push ABC member voices in those kind of spaces is a constant effort prioritize in our community.
And finally, about your members running for office and city council.
So we definitely encourage members to run for city council, but then they're gonna not be members because they're gonna be counselors. And while we do have relationships with city council and definitely get our voices heard, there's a strong line. I mean, I think we always want pro-housing candidates to run for office, and we will work hard for them. And we put out, ABC itself puts out a candidate questionnaire and hosts a forum before every election season, and that will help us figure out who to endorse and what they think. And you know, Jesse was integral in developing that process, but it really does push candidates to say what they support and, you know, not just say they're for more housing or they believe in density, but actually like how they would vote in specific situations. And you know, there's a lot that people like wave a hand at, and then when they get in a position of power, wouldn't push forward. And you know, from the campaign perspective, we really try to hold people accountable. So I will say we have actually focused more on land use boards lately, because both the planning board and in Cambridge it's the BZA, the Board of Zoning Appeal, had recent kind of application cycles. So we did get a few ABC members that applied to the BZA and recently got voted on. So that's a really exciting moment for our movement in the city.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'll do 5. So when you're halfway.
Okay. Hi there. So I'm Jeff Byrnes. I'm a co-founder and steering committee member of Somerville YIMBY. We are a little younger than ABC, and when I got together, well, I wasn't still am actually a dues-paying member of Better Cambridge, because that's where I got started with this effort. And when I moved to Somerville, and I was literally 1 block inside Somerville when I moved there. I was still in my Porter Square. I turned to Jesse one day and I was like, all right, so where's the Better Somerville, or where's the Somerville YIMBY group? And he was like, oh, that's cool. There isn't one, you should start one. And I laughed at his face, and then he stared at me, and then I stared at him, and now it's 7 years later, and I'm still doing this, which is great. But, he put me together with some folks, who put me together with other folks who helped me be my co-founders in this 7 years ago now, 7 years ago this April, in fact. It's funny, even living right next door to Cambridge, we couldn't be more different than either. Like, we were in all kinds of things in Somerville, different governance system, all kinds of things. And that kind of gets to Jesse's earlier point about like what's tough in Massachusetts. Each of our 351 homes is totally different, even if they're right next to each other. They're so close, like Cambridge and Somerville and Boston and Brookline and everywhere else around here. And that makes it harder. So I looked at a Better Cambridge to try to kind of figure out, like, okay, well, how can I model this group and what can we do? And in spite of that, I had to really chart a different course with the group, because the city worked differently and had a different political identity and had a different social identity. Cambridge is known for its universities and its professors and, that whole history. Somerville is not. Somerville used to be called Somerville and is known as an old working class, place full of, European immigrants and all that whole history. It's just totally different. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm going to start over again. And that was great. The group has, unlike a Better Cambridge, we've remained a completely, not incorporated group, which gives us some more flexibility. Like, we can have elected as members because we're not a nonprofit. So interesting, weird technical details there and other stuff you can talk to us about. Unlike a Better Cambridge, we didn't have any catalyzing events like a change in the zoning to Central Square that really brought folks to the table. We're like, hey, what's this mean? What's this about? And we didn't have a single point to drive folks. And so, one of our biggest challenges has been gaining members and getting people interested and into the conversation. And thankfully, I think we can lean on our friends at other organizations and go, hey, do you know anybody, in Somerville who's like looking to get involved and doesn't know what to do? So we really leaned on each other, and I think that's a big part of what Abundant Housing Mass really brings here, and why it's really great to be sitting here and talking. As far as the things we've worked on and either accomplished or tried to push forward, I think I'm most proud of the fact that when we got going, Somerville was 2 years into what ended up being a 5-year process of rewriting our zoning ordinance from scratch. And this is, I won't call it a bad idea, but it's a very hard idea. And I would say it's probably better to do it piece by piece, like Boston and Cambridge have done in recent years and over history. Nonetheless, we decided to boil the ocean, and we somehow managed to at least pull a part of it. And we rewrote the whole zoning. It took 3 more years. It ended up being 5 drafts in the end. This is not a small document either. But we got really involved with that. And that's like really nerdy and really hard, and it's not for everyone for sure. But we did our best as a tiny group to kind of move the conversation about that and to show up and be present. And that gets to what Becca was saying, that like a lot of times being the 1 or 2 yes, or even just this is fine voices in the room, when the rest of the room is all the folks who are the no voices. Because of course they're motivated to be there. They're angry about this. They don't like it. They're afraid of it. Whatever's motivating them, that's very motivating. If you're okay with stuff, you're like, okay, that's fine, I guess it'll work, right? Like, I like that these people, they're gonna do the thing that's okay, right? And they might not, because they might not hear you say it's okay, because you're at work, or you can't go to the meeting, or you didn't hear about it, or you think the meeting's gonna go fine. And that was kind of a big thing we kept trying to encourage folks when we got out to meetings and got involved and got people pulled in. Like, it's really great to just go to one meeting every once in a while and just be that yes voice. And we were that yes voice at those zoning meetings. And, you know, they passed it in 2019, so a major change to the city. We're still getting the hang of it. And along the way, we helped to make Clarendon Hill redevelopment possible, and that's making sure that 212 low-income families can stay in that public housing when it gets rebuilt and is brand new again. And that's from World War I. So that's old, really, really tough housing that they're still living in. And so that's a huge win. And it's got lots of market reach go with it that helps subsidize it. Whole big thing. A lot of great organizations made that possible when we were there, you know, trying to help them do that and showing up to say yes. And now there's new stuff happening. Union Square redevelopment is something we've been plugged into a little bit and trying to get more plugged into. And you can all see those skyscrapers going up even from this side of the river. And that's a major change for Somerville. And so yeah, you know, so just trying to really get more folks involved there. And we did endorsements for the first time in the most recent election. And shockingly, everyone we endorsed was elected. I couldn't tell you how stoked I was when those results came in and I woke up the next day. I don't expect to ever be that good ever again. That's a total beginner's luck as far as I can tell. But it was wonderful. It was great. And I think we have the most pro-housing, the best city council I've seen in almost a decade of living in Somerville. And I'm really excited. And I'm excited to help a lot of those folks regain election this coming year. And there's some challenges to that. And our new mayor is a challenge too. She's still figuring things out, and I think that's also great, because as great as Cartée was, he was ready to move on. And you know, it's like, okay, we need some fresh blood, so let's do it. Let's figure it out. And we have to figure out how to push on her and make those things happen. So if you know anybody in Somerville who wants to get involved in this work, please come get me, because I need more people. I need more capacity. That's our hardest thing. Yeah.
I have a couple extra minutes.
Okay.
Can both of you talk about dynamics of being in towns with universities and lots of students like Tufts and Cambridge, and how they can or do get involved?
I love when the Harvard Crimson interviews us and then we never hear from them again. It's great because students have a lot of good energy around housing justice and want to learn about all of these things with affordable housing and zoning and stuff that they haven't been exposed to before. And in a city like Cambridge, a lot of that's really obvious. So, you know, I think it's good organized energy, but they leave all the time. And the dynamic of the university presence creates its own just next level gentrification, displacement, and transience kind of vibe in the city. I'm like from Cambridge, and it's changed so much since I was a kid, and a lot of it is really evident in the way that, you know, the university staff lives and the zones that are part of Harvard or MIT. Like MIT has land banked all of Kendall Square and parts of Central. Like, it's really extreme in the way that they've changed the city and shaped it, and that bleeds into a lot of the neighborhoods. So I would say on the student level and organizing and getting people involved in housing issues, it's exciting, although like any volunteer situation, it's a little iffy. but the actual university footprint, despite the fact that it does bring a lot of engaged people and folks that are ready to jump into these complex housing ideas, like it does bring them to us. It also, I think, is a really negative impact on the stability of a lot of Cambridge neighborhoods. So it's a double-edged sword for sure.
It's a little different for Somerville because even though people associate Tufts with Somerville, most of the campus is actually in Medford. So it's kind of a funny thing, right? People are like, oh, Tufts, it's in Somerville. I mean, yes, and most of the students tend to live over on this side because it's easier to get there, and Somerville is more fun. No, I'm teasing Medford. But we also have a ton of folks who go to MIT or Harvard or Berkeley, which is where I went to school here in Boston, or any other universities. You know, for a long time, Somerville was a really, really reasonably priced place for students to live on their own and have an apartment. Those days have largely passed, but there's still lots of places, and there's still lots of apartments that 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 of them, a little bit less legally, can bundle up and rent an apartment, which the biggest challenge there is one I talk about a lot, which is that I think a lot of times there's a lot of anger towards students because they're in direct competition with households that have kids, you know? And like, when you've got 4 incomes, even if they're really, you know, student level incomes, or, you know, if their parents are helping subsidize, which is a lot of kids who go to private school here, they're gonna outcompete any household. Even both parents are pretty well-heeled. And if they're not well-heeled, it's a single-parent household where they've got another dependent like grandparents or an aunt or uncle who, you know, is also there besides the children and needs help, forget it. You know, you're gonna get pushed out to somewhere far beyond the center of the Boston area. And that's the biggest thing I think that hurts all of us. And it hurts us in all different ways. And I think that's really, that displacement is kind of at the core of what's really hard. At the same time, like Becca said, students bring all this wonderful vivacity and energy and like gung-ho, and just, they want to get stuff right. They want to be good. They want to make an impact, you know? Like, we've all been there at some point in our lives, I think, feeling that like, what do I do? I want to do something great. Like, oh my gosh, I want to make my mark on the world and do good. And, you know, and they've got time. You know, like, they have classes and they have their extracurriculars and they got time other than that. And that's something a lot of us don't have anymore. I certainly don't. And I'm lucky enough to only need to work 1 job. And lots of folks work 2 or 3 or more than that probably. And that's even harder. So, you know, I think getting involved with them is something we started to focus on in a big way. And one of my other steering committee members, Aaron Weber, just had a really great meeting with some Tufts students who invited him to come to a meeting like this really at Tufts. And he came back and he was raving about it. He's like, oh man, these kids, we gotta really go over it. We gotta go hang out all the time. They are so fired up. They're like, obviously they're so smart. When they go to Tufts, of course, like, come on. And I was like, well, Aaron, sounds like you're volunteering to be the student coordinator lead. He was like, wait, I'm the marketing guy. What are you doing? I am lucky enough to have a professional marketer on my steering committee. So grab one of those if you find them, because they're awesome. So that's one of my things this year. And consistently, like, outreach. And I think we haven't tapped the student population of Somerville enough. And it's because I'm a fair bit away from that myself now. And most of the folks who have come to this naturally are also in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And like, that's great. But it means we don't have any connection to those student communities anymore. So we gotta go kind of reach in sort of intentionally instead of like waiting for it to happen. So yeah, I think there's a lot there.
Good afternoon. I'll get a little closer here. So my name is Steve Gay, and can people hear me? Okay, great. I'm representing WalkUp Roslindale this afternoon as a board member and of our very unstaffed and very grassroots organization. Quick intro of who I am. My first 30 years were spent roaming around the Midwest. I started in St. Paul, Minneapolis. I went from there to Chicago, then St. Louis and Kansas City. And then I moved to Roslindale, and I've spent the last 40 years here. My career in Boston was primarily in city government, as a city planner, urban planner, and then as Mayor Menino's technology advisor. I also did work as a nonprofit manager around energy efficiency and community development. And my wife and I raised our 2 daughters here in Roslindale, or over there in Roslindale, I should say. We're both retired and are very involved in Roslindale affairs through various organizations such as Roslindale Village Main Street, Roslindale Bikes, Friends of the Roslindale Library, Progressive West Roxbury Roslindale, and then, of course, WalkUp Roslindale. So what is this WalkUp Roslindale thing? Well, I can kind of sum it up just in one sentence. I live a 5-minute walk from Roslindale Square, the business district, and a 10-minute bike ride from JP Center and West Roxbury Center. And that's pretty much the story of what WalkUp Roslindale endeavors to do for other folks who live in Roslindale. From our mission statement quote, WalkUp Roslindale is made up of residents who live, work, or simply care about Roslindale and intend to make it the most pedestrian-friendly neighborhood in the city of Boston. We formed about 8 years ago. We formalized as an LLC just last year, and we have an active board of 23 members currently. We do have a fiscal agent for donations. I think we've raised, I don't know if you know how much it is, it's like $250 or something so far. We really don't need much money at this point, but we do have a fiscal agent. We work through 2 volunteer committees, transportation and housing. Transportation includes advocating for mass transit, including express bus lanes. We've got the first one that I know of in Boston that goes from the square into Forest Hills. That was about 4 years ago, I believe. And Zone 1A ferry on the theater line. It costs $6.50 to go from Roslindale Square to Forest Hill Station. You can imagine that's just 1 mile. If you're on the train from Forest Hills to South Station, it's it's the same as you pay on the subway. So it makes a lot of sense for all these Zone 1s, which includes most of West Roxbury, Roslindale, and other neighborhoods, Hyde Park, to go to Zone 1A. We also work around hiking and pedestrian infrastructure, including slow streets, and then parking, especially in the square. So housing is mostly about advocating before the BPDA and ZBA for more density, lower parking ratios, more affordability, and energy efficiency with proposed housing developments. So recent accomplishments. I thought long and hard about this. I think the one that sticks out for me is 4198 Washington, which is a great example of how we fought for an important transportation-oriented design project in Roslindale Square. 5 stories, 31 units on Washington Street, 100 feet from Adams Park, which is the heart of Rossi Square, 61% affordable units, no parking. It was a hard fight, and we worked on it for about 3 years with the developer. It received BPDA approval, I think, 2.5 years ago, against the objection of many neighbors that you can imagine. We're mainly concerned about parking and traffic. Unfortunately, after getting that approval, it was voted down by the ZBA. In fall of 2021, about 3 weeks after Michelle Wu was elected mayor. So kind of disappointing, since many of us have worked hard for her campaign. To give you a little more background on that, it was before she had redone the ZBA, so understandable. So 2 of the ZBA members who voted against it were Roslindale residents, including the chairwoman. So we staged a vigorous social media campaign that targeted the ZBA for turning it down. We turned out for that, and we got letters. 50 months later, the project went back to the ZBA with an increase from 40% to 61%. Affordability and a transformed ZBA and a passed unanimously. So that was a great example of hard work. So other issues that we've worked on that have been encouraging and have really resulted in good things. Parking study. We worked on this for years in the square. BPD recently came out with it. It's really about, if you talk to anybody who's a business owner or anybody who's a resident who uses their vehicle to get around, there's not enough parking in the square. And we have a very compact and vibrant business district that includes a large municipal parking lot and 2 MBTA lots. Unfortunately, many business owners and their employees park right on the main drag early in the morning and keep that spot for the entire day. So it's hard if you do depend on a car to find a parking spot right in front of the store you want to be in front of. So the parking study concluded there really is a parking problem, but that traffic flow and parking near businesses could be improved with meters in a business district in Boston, can you believe it? And 1 or 2 hour zones in the square. So implementation is planned for this summer, and we've advocated for this for many years and are pleased by the study and by the imminent construction. Third one, and I'll be quick about this, the Roslindale Gateway Path. We partnered with several Roslindale organizations and Livable Streets Alliance and AHMA to put a bike and pedestrian path from Roslindale Village, commuter stop at 4 stations, about 1.5 miles. The first 5 legs of the path will be, or the first of 5 legs will be constructed this summer. And one of the goals is to link an environmental justice community just off Washington Street with a new entrance to the Arboretum. We've raised close to $2 million for design and construction from the city and state. Our challenges, I've got a couple of minutes here. I pinpointed 2 proposed developments. One is Dale Street, 24 units of all affordable housing, and Crane Ledge, 450 units in a mostly wooded area and 22 acres of land. They really epitomized some of the major issues that I think a lot of us here in this room face when you want to do housing and you've got issues in the nearby community. The smaller one on Dale Street, 100% affordable, young black developer who lives in the neighborhood is being opposed by nearby homeowners, claiming that since it is wooded and backs up to an urban wildlife, it shouldn't be built. Has anybody out there heard that one before? The larger project is a very large parcel called Crane Ledge Woods that is at the nexus of Roslindale, Hyde Park, and Mattapan, and abuts an environmental justice community. The developer, very large, is out of Houston, is proposing a suburban layout with very large parking lots, totally out of character with the immediate neighborhood. The community wants the land to remain as open space. The land is owned by a black church, and most of the organizations advocating against development are led by people of color. A very difficult set of issues that we face in trying to promote housing in an environmental justice community. I think there are elements of solutions out there, and we're trying to figure out what those would be. So the final issue, and I'll end on this, is the one we've all been talking about, and that's gentrification. The lack of income and racial diversity as rents and housing prices continue to increase. It's the most important issue that we face and the most intractable issue. Fighting for a diverse neighborhood is what our organization is about, and I'll end my presentation there. Thank you.
My name is Jenn, as I said a few times now. I grew up in Fall River, in the South Coast, and my husband and I were involved initially in a co-housing community that was trying to set up in Somerville, but we were in Somerville at the time, renting, and Somerville was too expensive, shockingly, and then we started looking at Lawrence to convert a mill, and that didn't pencil either. And so when that group decided to use Chapter 40B and locate out near 495, we got it, because we're city nice. And settled in Dorchester in 2006, in a two-family with my in-laws are from the first floor. So our own little mini co-housing. And so being here during that time, there was a block-wide parcel at the bottom of my street that I was like, wow, that's like so obviously developable. I'm sure that'll be, built in like a year or two. And then after something, I realized it had been vacant that way for 30 years. About 5 or 6 years after we got here, BPDA proposed what is now Bloomfield Gardens there. And I went to the community meeting to say, yay, why is it only 4 stories that looks like 3? And the developer was like, well, there's no way we could get approval for more than that. And there were people in that meeting who said the developer was trying to make Fields Corner into New Jack City, which is like a reference to like the housing projects in Chicago. That was maybe the start of some of my radicalization on these issues. And then I was, for 5.5 years, the director of Greater Ashmont Main Street, which exposed me to all of the amazing writing and urbanism that has come out in the last maybe decade. Around 2018, Jared Johnson and Sean Wheeler and I were snarking in back channels online whenever there'd be like a historic parking lot being discussed or what have you. And the two of them invited me in to do an op-ed, a commentary in the local paper about we have the opportunity to keep Dorchester welcoming and diverse and vibrant if we all agree to build more of what Dorchester already looks like, to make it legal to build what's already here, and to reduce the amount, the 10 to 15% a lot of developers end up having to budget for community process that can go on for literally 7 to 10 years in some cases, projects that we've been following. So that op-ed came after we had a couple of socials to try and get people talking about this. And that was, we view that as our founding. Personal details that like my house burned down 3 days before that op-ed came out. So between that and 2 of our founding members of the small school leadership group getting priced out of Boston, we were not as active as we had expected to be in 2019, and then we had a pandemic. What I'm thrilled to share is that over the last 18 months, we've really re-energized, and I have a 6-person steering committee. We meet monthly. There's a diversity of talents on it that really helps. And our mailing list was 95 at the start of March and is now at 170. And we've been able to, and we have a logo, and we've been able to step into a lot of the conversations and develop a more formalized, like a template for engagement with the projects coming through the BPDA, and to the extent that we get made aware of them, the ZBA stuff. The stuff that's under 20,000 square feet that's only in the ZBA, sometimes we don't find out in time to be of any help. But between live tweeting, contentious meetings in which some of our neighbors aren't acting as their best selves, and just really pushing out into the general knowledge how consistent some of the tropes of opposition are, and hopefully teaching some of the people who aren't housing dorks like we are to like sort of spot them in the context where they come up in their neighborhood, what have you. The 2 of the projects that are of current high contention that we have mobilized folks for are the Pine Street Inn conversion at 900 Morrissey. Heads up, the BPDA is meeting again on Monday, and you should sign up and attend the Zoom, please, thank you. It is 99 units of 100% affordable housing, income restricted to 30% AMI for formerly homeless neighbors, most of whom are already neighbors who live here in other housing that they're aging out of because they can't do 3 flights of stairs anymore. These are studio apartments. And at one of the opening community meetings, not a BPDA meeting, but meeting with the Civic Association, they heckled a priest who was in support of it. Like there was such venom. And before this meeting, I had come to the conclusion that we as an organization are not going to encourage, and certainly not strong-arm, any of our members to go to these civic association spaces, which aren't even formally part of the process. When I had my cis-het white guys saying, no, that's just too much for me, there's like no way I'm trying to convince our membership to do that, when we have the opportunity to be in a properly moderated space and give the kind of feedback and letters of support. And between activating First Parish Dorchester on the Pine Street Inn and a couple of other progressive churches in the nearby area who we have general partnerships with and what have you, the final comments that they received was over 480 in the process so far, and I think we got it to like 45% in favor. Which is huge, and I understand that it was noticed the day that started happening in terms of like when D&D started receiving that kind of support. The other project currently in high contention is at 150 Center Street. That parcel is immediately adjacent to Shaman Station. The developer currently has a proposal in front of them, tried to propose something 7 years ago, and the neighborhood didn't want anything to do with it and was energetically and opposed. And it is one of the wealthiest, most resourced neighborhoods in Dorchester. And these are the neighborhoods that are showing up in exclusionary tone for these kinds of things. When Meeting House Hill has a meeting about a BPDA proposal, there's like 8 or 9 people, and 2 of them are cranky about it, and the others are like, can we get a bench? So they dropped the project. Someone else, a smaller scale developer, came in and worked with me when I was at Main Street to pencil out, okay, if you want it, this is what the land costs, and it's fairly valued at that. If you want it to be maximum affordability, this is what that has to look like, and it was around 65 units, if I recall correctly. And then I could do workforce type housing. I mean, no, that was 8, and then so the teachers and the nurses and everyone sort of missing middle housing, and that would be about 65. But in the smallest I could do, to do luxury development, all market rate but for IDP, was 42. Neighborhood says it's zoned for 8. We can't do more than 8 next to the train station. They actually came up with a number that they compromised to 22. And he bowed out. And now the first developer is back with a different proposal that's in its PNF stage right now. And we're down to 72 units at this point, where 7 years ago we could have gotten 120, or we should get 120, period. And in the initial proposal, 39 parking spots right next to the train. So we've been trying to show up in that conversation to push the envelope, the overhead window thing, yeah. Like to push the conversation to include all of the people who are fine with it, okay with it. Wait a minute, why isn't it bigger? What are you doing? But have zero motivation to show up to a church basement on a Wednesday with no childcare or no food, to say, I'm fine with that. And are never going to show up to a meeting like the Pine Street Inn, where, the name calling and the physically in people's faces screaming at them. So we're trying to provide the channel to do that, for those people to have a voice, to organize those people to know how to get involved in the process, the easy thing that they can do, 5 quick actions, and like twice a month I send a newsletter with like click here to comment. These are what's coming up. The deadline is such. Like and slowly building that kind of collaborative, but available at different levels of intensity for people's time, availability, and attention. So I think we're the younger, we did most mature youngest organization on the panel. I look forward to talking to anyone one-on-one. We all will be happy to talk to anyone one-on-one at the end. We have like 15 minutes before we get to the Byrnes and at the Byrnes for everyone who joined us there. But thank you so much for listening and for being here and being interested in doing this work, maybe in your neighborhood or with one of us if you're ours.
I think it's really helpful to note that when APC started, it was because of very specific developments and proposals, exactly like Jenn is describing. And we have grown and progressed to focus very much on zoning, right? And that's a lot of what AHMA is doing. That's a lot of the language that we use in city meetings. That's what all of us are focused on in the big picture sense. If zoning was better, if it allowed for more density, if it allowed for many kinds of apartments, and did it require parking, we wouldn't be having those conversations. Like, these fights are so important and take so much time and so much energy, and in order to make us all do this work better and easier for the long term, like, zoning needs to change. And it's like, your examples really, really highlight how important that is. So.
And I think it's just good to end on a coda of like, Dorchester Growing Together has like 5 things that we're committed to as what those changes that would make everything so much easier. To eliminate single-family zoning entirely, allowing fourplexes and accessory dwelling units as of right everywhere with much higher density, encourage their transit. To shift to parking maximums instead of parking minimums. To engage with our colleges and universities. We can't force it. I can't figure out a way as a lawyer. I can't figure out a way to legally force them, but to encourage and incentivize them to build a ton more dormitory housing, to pull the students out of the rental stock, and to increase funding for affordable housing efforts citywide. But beyond those, we need to enact tenant protections now to prevent displacement while we create more housing to meet current demand, like the eviction moratorium and just cause eviction, the stabilization proposals that the mayor will put out. So like those are the kind of things that can be the platforms of organizations like this, and there's different variations the different organizations have. We're a big tent, it's not all unanimous on all of those things, but we hope you will get involved. And I'll invite the next panelist to come up. Our next panel is our subject matter experts. So you can stay there. You can stay. Just stay right there. Becca's going to be on the second panel too because of all of her background in affordable housing in Rhode Island and Boston. Raul Duverge is joining us with the hat of a former senior project manager at the BPDA, and he's going to explain a bit of the alphabet soup around the ZBA, the BPDA, IAGs, what master planning is, and how things move through the process. He's going to start us off. And then Chanda, who is founder and CEO of Onyx Group, which is a Black woman-owned development consulting firm, focused primarily on affordable housing in Roxbury, but in other areas, dabbles in other things. So we're going to go Raul, Chanda, and Becca, and I'm going to stay here to help keep a little time and if there's follow-up clarifications. And for Raul, there's stuff in your handout where you can kind of follow along about the BPDA stuff, and Becca has slides that I'll tell you. I can make that happen.
to hear from you this afternoon on Saturday. A little bit about myself. Again, my name is Raul. A little bit about myself really quick. Again, my name is Raul Duverge. Originally from, born and raised in Everett. Last 10 years I lived here in Uncle's Corner. In terms of, after high school, went to UMass Amherst, went to political science major. After that, I went to grad school at Northeastern. During my time at Northeastern is how I was introduced to the world of the BPDA, real estate development, and whatnot. And my life just went down that rabbit hole for the last 15 years. So, all in all, it's been a great experience, learned a lot.
Make it so
So again, my career at the BPDA,
it's not doing the second screen.
I started as an intern while I was
You want a
grad
mirror?
student at Northeastern.
Show the
That
different things.
internship, that was 2010. That ultimately turned into a 11-year tenure at the BPDA. That internship turned into full-time employment. Started as a project assistant within the development review department, and ultimately worked my way up to senior project manager. In which until 2021. Then from there, I was offered an opportunity to work for a new real estate development and construction management company called Byrnes Construction, which is also based out here in Dorchester, in the Pennrose area. Myself, I've lived in Dorchester the last 10 years or so, not too far away from here in Oakland's Corner. Great
When I do it,
really love
what
it.
do I do?
Don't plan on leaving anytime
So,
soon. Family's grown, so I have to start looking for a
click
bigger
on
place.
screen mirroring.
Oh no, it's a great.
You can go ahead and click on that now. It won't do anything yet.
And during my time at the BPDA,
Switch it to
as
the
a
built-in
development
display.
like I should take a step back. The BPDA has a number of functions. One of them is they serve as a regulatory agency to review development projects of a certain size and scale. Unlike other communities in the city, like in the Commonwealth, for example, Everett, Somerville, Cambridge, etc., they typically have a planning board as the equivalent thereof to review development projects. Then if they need zoning variance of some sort, they go to zoning board of appeal, they go for the city council for a special permit, whatever the case may be. In Boston, the BPDA serves essentially as a planning board equivalent, in that they are responsible for reviewing projects that are at least 15 units of housing or larger, or at least 20,000 square feet. So from our perspective, our department in particular, the development review, we're responsible for administering that community review process that a project is required to undergo pursuant to Article 80 of the Boston Zoning Code. Article 80 of the Boston Zoning Code is what gives the BPDA that regulatory review authority over projects of that size and scale. Within that, Article 80 also grants the BPDA the other, regulatory powers to implement overlay zoning districts like Article 80C, which is for planned development areas. Article 80B for institutional master plans, that's the ability for the BPDA to grant essentially zoning overlay districts for hospitals and universities in the city that have a certain footprint. And then within I guess the development projects themselves, I mentioned 15 units or larger. There is a threshold for bigger projects, which is Article 80B for the Boston Zoning Code, which is applicable to large projects, which in that definition is projects over 50,000 square feet of development or substantial rehabilitation. In terms of the process itself, the way it was, I like to characterize it for folks, at least in Boston, and I think it's applicable to other municipalities in the state. I look at it as a three-legged stool. What I mean by that is these community processes and just the internal review process and project go, there's typically three large stakeholders. One being the elected officials, the mayor's office, local city council, state reps, state senators. Every municipality is a little different. Some are more involved than others. The other two legs of the stool would be the way I describe it, or the way I look at it is you have your city officials, meaning whether it's your planning department, transportation department, in Boston you have the BPDA. That's the second leg of the stool, and the most critical one where a lot of projects get tripped up is the third leg of the stool, which is the community. What I mean by the community is your general community members, whether it's your civic associations, abutters, advocacy groups, activists, etc. In Boston, my experience, I guess this is actually not even in Boston. I think throughout the Commonwealth, the community process is typically what dictates the velocity by which a project gets permitted, and often can significantly inform how the project ultimately changes, how fast it gets approved, if it even gets approved. our affiliation. Me and them with BPDA can't be out there up in front supporting or opposing projects. Now in my new role at Rise Construction, we're working on multi-residential portfolio, which runs the spectrum, everything from majority of our projects are between 15 units and under 20 units. There are some anomalies where we do some life science projects, a few development residential high-rise projects in the city. The majority of our project portfolios in that realm. I think in terms of just talking about the BPDA, I guess I'll focus on my experience there. I had the opportunity to work on several transformative projects. I see a few folks here that worked with me in some capacity on them. One was a one-room housing redevelopment project in Charlestown, which, for those that don't know, is one of the largest public housing developments in the city, the region, New England. Over 1,000 units of low-income housing, predominantly folks of color that live there in an area, in the neighborhood that is the second most affluent, first or second most affluent in the city of Boston. Other project I had the pleasure of working on, again with some folks in this room, was something down in Onyx, Boston. It was the largest, as of 2021, it was I think the largest development project in the city that was reviewed and approved by the city of Boston, which was, for those that aren't familiar with the site, it's 120 acres in East Boston, the 30 acres that is in Revere. That project underwent a 2.5-year community review process. Taking a step back, the issue I found in my career at the BPDA was always, again, really goes back to that three-legged stool. We have BPDA placed a lot of emphasis on community review process and community engagement, and I think from my time, take a step back, from 2012 when I first started, which was under the Meeting administration. I had the pleasure of working majority of my career under the Boston administration, and the last piece was under the Jenn administration prior to Mayor Wu's administration coming in. And what I noticed throughout that process was we went from 2012 small projects with 15-unit buildings up to 15-unit buildings up to about 40 or 50 units where you kind of get cut off and large projects. I witnessed from those processes we typically take anywhere from 30 to 90 days. We go over a community review process, have the meetings, you do elected officials, etc. And then you ultimately get BPA approval and then advance it to the ZBA. I saw that process go from about 30 to 90 days to now. My new capacity, we worked with a few projects through a small project review process. It take it easily over a year to get through the BPA, and then from there you're looking at another probably 3 to 6 months to get through the ZBA process. So I think part of that has to do with obviously we want to make sure that the community is well informed and has the ability to shape and mold projects. But one of the issues I saw throughout my career was in those 10 years was that the sentiment around the real estate development got increasingly more negative, toxic. I would say a lot of folks that started to attend those meetings were usually, as I mentioned, it wasn't to support the meeting in most cases. Obviously, you do have your exceptions where you'll have folks that like this, where they'll make concerted efforts to attend and participate and advocate on behalf of good projects, but the majority of processes do get, for lack of better words, tend to get hijacked by folks that are not really supportive of the project, whatever it's block review, parking, non-agreement with the use, whatever the case may be. So I do see that from my perspective and my experience as well, has become one of the issues in that is the lack of engagement from, I think, folks with all difference of opinions. Again, I'd say typically when you go into these meetings, it's usually the same 10 folks, 10 to 15, and every neighborhood has 10 to 15 folks that usually goes in for whatever reason. So I think groups like this are critical, I think, to advancing projects that are bringing a lot of great benefits, affordable housing, housing for seniors, housing for low-income folks, whatever the case may be. I think the engagement for folks like this is critical to advancing these projects. In Boston, I think in the last thing, going back to my tenure there, and my experiences now, we have seen an increase in the amount of planning studies that happen. This administration has increasingly focused on planning. I would say it started under Mayor Walsh, and it's continued under Mayor Raul. But one of the issues it's great we're doing all this planning. We've seen a number of planning studies get approved. South Boston, South planning study was completed, I want to say 2016, had a number of development projects go through. They would follow the criteria, whether it's from design, land use, etc. They'll comply, they'll get a BPDA, they would get BPDA approval, and then they go to the zoning board of appeals. They would get sued by a butter because the zoning wasn't up to date and consistent with what the planning study set forth. We'll mention the project in particular, this one in South Boston, will commonly have conformance with the planning study in every regard. When the butter came, they sued them, got back and it was just a money grab. This happens all the time. Now, planning, I think in the city of Boston, I think throughout the region, planning studies are all great, master planning is great, but the critical piece to all that to enable good development, responsible development to happen in an efficient fashion is implementation of the zoning. In Boston, that's been an issue. As I mentioned, plans South Boston, again, it was 2016, we're still waiting for it to go into zoning. To give an example. I think in my experience, there was one planning study that I can remember off the top of my head that I know was completed and implemented into zoning. I think it's yielded a lot of great results, and that was in the Harrison-Albany corridor in the south end, where you see the Ink Block, Troy, all these new mixed-use neighborhoods that have emerged in the last 10 years. So, anyways, I'm not talking about it. I want to wrap up. I'm happy to take any questions. I think in terms of just with the BPDA, so I didn't want to focus larger on that just because that's where it came from. There is and I think folks here are aware of it, the Zoning Board of Appeals. They're the body that it's a group of appointed members by the mayor, and they're responsible for granting zoning relief in the city of Boston, for projects in the city of Boston. But I would say the majority of the zoning projects require zoning relief, just because of the fact that zoning in the city, depending on the neighborhood, it was done in the 1960s, 1970s, etc. So land use, just the market has changed significantly since then. Majority of projects require zoning relief, unfortunately, and that sets up projects for potential litigation, depending on the neighborhood, the butters, how angry people may get. It's a dirty secret out there that a lot of folks weaponize the zoning relief process to essentially get payouts. The one I referenced in some lawsuits. Not a bad business, I guess, if you're not to agree to, but I don't think it's right personally. For me, in my own place, like shakedown. It's like you're okay with them. You're not okay with them unless you have $1 million. Let's sit right with me. So zoning. So again, that's an ancillary. It's a process that's connected to the BPDA, but it's its own separate thing. Again, the majority of projects that do get jammed up after BPDA approvals because of that piece of litigation that may happen after zoning relief is granted. And then the others, from a zoning perspective, again, another process that is tied to the BPDA is the Boston Zoning Commission. You hear less about. Boston Zoning Commission is the body that approves zoning overlay districts throughout the city of Boston. So planned development areas, urban renewal districts, etc. They're responsible for changing and updating the zoning code. Under this current administration, I've seen, talking with colleagues and friends, and just being on the other side now, working with projects through the process. The administration now is placing an emphasis on implementing planning studies into zoning, which I think is a welcome. And I think hopefully, with the implementation of the planning studies, you're seeing the idea of density bonuses. If you were to get this FBR, you need 20% for it. You're starting to see that, which I think is all great. It sets up predictability. I think it helps you move good projects along faster, more efficiently, and less of your hidden tickets and you remain kind of along the way. So, I talk a lot. Hopefully, some of that makes sense. Happy to elaborate more if there's any other questions going on. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. Turn it over to my colleagues here on the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chanda. I'm co-founder of the Onyx Group. We are a Boston-based Black women-owned brokerage and development company. And our approach to development is multicultural. It is inclusive and focusing on building communities that integrate and leverage local business collaborations with public and private partnerships. Our why is such that our goal was also to change the face of development and how it occurred. And in doing that, we realized that changing the affordable housing climate and dynamic was to create developments that invest in their residents and communities and establish city and state private partnerships. We realized that in order to effectively make a difference, we had to break silos. We had to speak to our healthcare organizations and partners, and our banks, our estate planning, our workforce, our veterans, seniors, policy, advocacy, all these different facets they comprise development, they affected development. And also we realized that we simply could not do it alone. One of our first projects that my partner in Chanda, and I started was Cast Crossing. And this was it was a crash course into community development. It was, we realized that there was a need for Black women developers. We were the first Black women-owned brokerage company in Massachusetts, which was unheard of. But we also realized that we had to work. It was imperative that we work with the city and the state to incentivize the creation of affordable home ownership and business ownership. We also realized that developing housing that fosters growth and independence was a crucial need. And we also realized that two Black women cannot walk in a bank and ask for $5 million stating that we want to build affordable housing. We realized we couldn't do it alone, and to increase the quality of housing and advocacy and partnership and repeat, we had to partner and to scale. Our approach to development is not only focusing on development needs of the specific communities that they serve, but reducing the development's carbon footprint, meaning that having wraparound services, developments that have a mental health thinking component in the development such that amenities that help families thrive. In order to scale, we had to partner, and if it wasn't for the folks but two women in particular, Karen and Melissa Fishquill from YIMBY Properties. They basically heard our presentation at Cast Crossing and said, listen, great job, great idea, but you can't do it alone. So they encouraged us to find a project. Once we found a project, they would guarantee it. And then guaranteeing that afforded Onyx Group, two Black women, to not only co-develop, but build 200 units of senior affordable housing in Foxborough. We are proud to say that we're in a 40B process, and we're breaking ground in 8 months. What's crucial about Foxborough is the process. YIMBY, right? It was not in my backyard. It was hard for to really talk to the folks about. It wasn't hard, but it was difficult. I don't say hard, but difficult because that's a stigma. Affordable housing has a stigma. We knew right by the projects when I was younger. You knew who lived there and what their income status was and what their parents' situation, parental situation was. You knew that just by virtue of the outside aesthetic of that housing project. And so it's no wonder why YIMBY is such a thing, and no wonder why I love Alma, because that's what we're again fighting for and fighting with and fighting together to come back. Because affordable housing is not synonymous, should not be synonymous with poverty. The other project we're really thrilled about, and it's a passion project for me because I grew up next door to it, is our Parcel P3 project. This is another example of a bigger developer really reaching down with integrity and saying, listen, these developers otherwise would not have an opportunity to build if it wasn't for that guarantee. And so Tom O'Brien, in conjunction with my City of Peace, formed P3 Roxbury. And that name was brilliantly thought of by my partner, Carlos Castillo, who's in the back, who's just an amazing consummate human man himself and a very integral part of Onyx Group. But this P3 Roxbury, www.p3roxbury.com, is 184 units of home ownership in Roxbury. 617,000 some odd square feet of life science, but also $124 million of reinvestment dollars going back into Roxbury. And this is truly something that we need. And you want to talk about the development process, right? Because we were designated this in October, and we're still in tentative. And why that's important is because our pro forma was estimated at $1.5 billion when we submitted. And now, because of cost, economy, inflation, all of those things, now we're in the $2 billion to build affordable housing. My partner Carlos just today, he has a wonderful program for his employees where he literally rehabs houses and gives them back to his employees for affordable housing. And there's a gap. The city gives you $150,000. The average cost to build a house, a single family house in Roxbury is $550, $560, correct me out. There's a gap. What's the incentive for a developer to fill that gap? Right. Because that's all we're getting in a developed world. So there's a need for advocacy there also, because there's a need for affordable housing, but again, that gap gets, that's just one unit, 150,000, right? So, multiply that over the need. And Houston, we have a problem. Or Roxbury, Dorchester, we have a problem. One of the things that I'm proud of is just being part of organizations like this and having in organizations like AHMA because of the advocacy. We're realizing that we can no longer live in a silo and be silent. And we realize that just like the opioid problem and everything else, it's not just a you problem or them problem, it's our problem. And it's incumbent upon us, brothers and sisters. We are our brother's keeper, and that's why advocacy is so important. So that's Onyx, that's what we're doing. I'm also on the board of the MBTA, so I take sympathy notes as we. But that's another passion project for me in terms of wanting to make a difference. Transit-oriented housing is another way that we can together really put a dent in the housing, but again, put our resources together, our minds together, and really just partner together to make this happen. Thank you for your time. This has been exciting. I want to definitely continue, but thank you.
Thanks to you both. I'm learning a ton and I'm really happy to be here. So I'm Becca Schofield. I'm also an affordable housing developer. I am a developer at Pennrose, a national company. I work for their New England team, and I spent about 6 years at a local nonprofit CDC in Cambridge, and then I've been at Pennrose for a couple of years now. So I work on affordable housing developments at a range of scale, sizes, locations. I've seen a few of you at community meetings for the Blessed Sacrament project in JP, so I'm working on that as we went through our Article 80 process, BLC, going to the ZBA. It's really tough, and we're going on 2 years of having site control. We really hope we get a state award and can start construction next year. But I think, I want to describe a little bit in more detail how complex it is to build affordable housing, to finance it, to get through zoning, to cobble together funding, to get the density you need. I just want to make a point first that we live in a really high-cost city, and in most of the country, any affordable housing that exists is subsidized housing, right? Like, we have to take it off the market in order to restrict rents for the long term. And that's essential. That means we have to get a lot of public money in our housing stock to protect it for people that need it and aren't going to be able to afford a market price. So that's rental, that's ownership, that's just like essential to this conversation. So yeah, I'm going to go through a little more detail how we kind of structure and finance. And then I also want to describe a few solutions that aren't necessarily, these really technical tax credit, state, federal subsidy projects that we can also use to make our housing more affordable in communities. So first, just to describe some barriers to creating affordable housing. We've talked a lot about how costly these projects are. A lot of that is just straight up acquisition costs for land, for existing buildings.
I can hand it to you.
Oh, that's cool.
Down arrow to switch.
I did.
Down arrow to switch.
So the competition for land is key. I'm coming from Cambridge too, where it's really astronomical, but that's throughout Boston, throughout Metro Boston. It's pretty comprehensive. Permitting risk, we talked about how essential zoning is. You know, if you think you might not be able to build the units in your pro forma, it's not going to pencil. You're paying money for design, you're paying money for time, you're paying money for your initial applications. It's huge risk that a company takes to get a product out there. And as soon as you start cobbling together sources, you have massive legal costs. Like, it's just a lot of layers on affordable housing that doesn't exist with standard real estate projects, so I really want to emphasize that. There are also a lot of other, you know, affordable housing projects out there that are waiting for money, so you have to really get in line. And clearly time is money. Like, I say my project is $30 million. 6 months later, it's $35 million, but everyone that I applied to for funding when it was $30 million is expecting it to stay that way. So I'm gonna have a $5 million gap when I get my funding, when I want to close. Like, this is really the world that we operate in, and it's a lot. It's just a lot of risk and a lot of kind of iterative budget and value engineering and design kind of conflict. Yeah, just conflict out. So it does. There's a lot of impact that policy can have, and we just really have to pay attention to how that works for projects to really let developers make the best decision for the project and the site they're on. And, you know, then there are a lot of other variables like interest rates going up, and they're not paying a bank money that should have gone into the building. And that's always heartbreaking, but it really is, again, the world we live in here. So permitting risk specifically, this is a lot of what was in Boston through the Article 80 process. You know, you need renters, you need plans, you need your basic pro forma, which takes a lot of work and a lot of study to figure out the best mix and which sources are going to fund what. You're paying fees and taxes in the meantime. You're responding to community comments and redesigning and working with your architects on that. You're making sure you have the title, you're getting a survey, you're working with utility companies. They're just, I really just want to emphasize the amount of detail that goes into getting in line for funding to try to start a conversation about the new project, and then we wait for a while. So more specifically, some especially high costs, definitely land and definitely the amount of time you spend waiting. Construction is like big ticket, obviously, but it's with lumber and steel, and when you work on a historic building, maybe you get funding for historic, like through the historic tax credit program, which is federal and state. That means you need really specific windows. That means you need really specific exterior materials for masonry, for slate. So there are a lot of other elements of construction that are particularly costly that just depend on new construction, sustainability standards. You want to put passive house, you want to be net zero. We all want those things. They come with costs, and they often don't come with subsidy support. Structured parking, I would never do, ever. I would never do underground parking. I would never do it in a garage. Like, I don't build parking. And it's not just because I don't think people should have as many cars as they usually do. It's all, you know, we try to build more transit, and that's a more sustainable pattern of development. It's also because I don't want to build a parking spot instead of a unit, and that really is the cost trade-off. For affordable projects too, we want to make sure it's staffed effectively. We want to make sure we have services there. For example, a good example, the Boston Sacrament project I'm working on, it's 55 units. It's 100% tax credit, so it's all below 60% area median income to be funded by the Low Income Tax Credit Program, which is a federal program. And that's how most affordable housing is built in the country, which is basically, you know, banks get tax credits for investing in affordable projects through the IRS. When we build really affordable units, we need to make sure we have services on site. We often have not just resident management on site, but case management, staffing, partnerships with organizations. That really matters, and we pay to have programs so the residents build community, and like, the more scale you have, the more you really have to invest in that. We also, I especially in Boston, but in general, like, I'm going to build an all-electric project. I'm not going to connect to gas. Electricity is more expensive. So we can try to build solar, that's expensive. There are a lot of ways that utilities vary, community to community, but it's always a consideration. And, you know, in affordable housing, we will also have maintenance staff, we have long-term contracts, so these are all features that people don't often think about, like how it's actually gonna operate and how you're actually gonna get money over time for a project. So you need subsidy, you need Section 8 vouchers, you need like often cost subsidies, so you'll have middle income or moderate income units, maybe market units within a development, so that you can keep the project going and make sure that you can continue to invest in staff and contracts and maintenance over time. This is an example of like a short list of some funding sources that we would go for affordable housing. So I'm not going to go through all of these. They're all specific to housing priorities at different income levels, and we call this like the alphabet soup. Everything has its acronym. Everything is really competitive. I'm just going to pull out a couple, like facilities, housing, the FCN program, community-based housing, that's for very supportive housing. So again, it's really, it has a higher cost, so we get a capital subsidy to build that on very often adaptive units. Workforce housing program is for middle income kind of housing, so where a unit would be eligible for tax credits or for voucher holder, you'll be able to have some higher income rent, but also get some capital subsidy. So it kind of helps solve those problems. It's quite self-evident. It's just really complex because you layer on all these subsidy projects and you have to have a certain percentage of your building geared towards these funds to make it feasible. I'm happy to talk more about how we actually structure these later. So this is just a kind of quick description of how we wait in line for funding and how long it takes to actually get it. You know, I typically will work for maybe 3 or 4 years on a project if zoning is straightforward, and maybe if it's new construction, if it's adaptive reuse or an occupied rehab, add a year or 2. If it's a historic project, like add another year. If it's more than 60 units, like add another, you're probably gonna have to do 2 phases. So this is kind of the nature of the beast. This is a project that HRI did in Cambridge, and I just wanna, like, these are the funding sources. So every funding source has its own application, has its own timeline, has its own requirements, and this is how you build affordable housing. So I wanted to kind of pivot to some solutions. Like this is just a short list of maybe how we can pull some levers. So if we get land for a little less money, if we have an approach to construction that's a little more affordable, you know, people look at this all the time, modular work, like construction is expensive. Permit fees, maybe we can waive those if the municipality is supportive, or we can get real estate tax abatement. That's always helpful. So, you know, most sites that are available are also brownfields. We need money to remediate that. Like there are other sources that we grab to try to do that. It might cause delay, but we really need all the help we can get from state and federal agencies that can support affordable development. I want to so density is really important. You need for example, we were talking about the operating costs that again a lot of people don't focus on when they look at a pro forma. If I have 30 units, I have to hire a resident services coordinator. If I have 50 units, I still am only going to have like a resident services coordinator. Maybe I'll have support services staff, it really depends on the mix. But if I have 20 units, I still have to pay them that same amount of money, right? So you really do spread a lot of the operating costs over multiple units. Per unit costs go down, you're more competitive for funding, your per unit costs are lower. It really does help to have density in a project and scale in a project. My company really doesn't do anything less than 50 units. And that's just because it takes so long. You know, we want to make sure that we can create an efficient project and make it a real community. So this is just, so this is a little more detailed about So I also just want to emphasize that affordable housing is actually really high quality and wonderful housing stock. You have so many people focused on how this new housing resource is going to be built and stable and durable materials, indoor quality, indoor air quality, really great landscaping, all these features that we really care about. Affordable housing's been on the leading edge of green development for a long time. I've built solar PV on every project. I think having this much federal and state and local support in a project, even though it does take time, actually really does make this housing better. And worth coming out in support for, and just we're really proud of that element of our work, that we are investing in public money in something that is really truly working for people. That's my last slide. So I think we just want to I'm happy to talk more about the technicalities of how you finance a project. Every project is different, and every developer is going to tell you that over and over and over, that the construction type, the neighbors, the zoning legislation, the funding available year to year, it all changes a lot. But the effort that people spend, putting these budgets together, tracking costs, bringing their teams together to really solve these housing problems, it's pretty incredible. And it deserves a lot of community support. And I think as a pro-housing group, right, it's worth our time to practice how we talk about it and how we understand the depth of the challenge of building affordable and income housing. And without a lot of time, there are non-tax credit options for building affordable. I think locally there are land trusts, there are co-ops. There are ways that communities can come together and make decisions to de-restrict their homes, to collectively invest in their buildings differently, have tenant ownership, tenant leadership, pay less rent. So I think those are also really valuable, and Boston's a really strong history of making those models work well. So,
Thank you all so much for sharing your experience and your expertise with us here today. We really appreciate the time that you've given us. Thank you. So we've heard a lot about how hard it is and complicated it is, and how challenging and different Boston is, because our Chapter 40A governs the other 350 cities and towns. And so legislation like the MBTA Communities Act covers them, but not Boston. And so the question that our next presentation is going to be well, what can we do in Boston? What would make these things easier in Boston? I'm going to invite Ian Hatchett, grab your seats, thank you. AHMA has a committee for Boston that meets every 2 weeks to talk about Boston-specific issues. And Ian is on that committee, and he's going to be presenting the situation and breakdown. And what I wanted to ask is, you want to stand? Okay. If you're sitting, that's fine, and then you can do this, and I can get off the stage. For the shot of the camera, can you sit down here? Thank you.
Right. Everybody hear me okay?
No.
Good?
No.
How about this? All right. Okay, does this work? Yes. There it is. All right.
And then just the down arrow.
Perfect. I'm back here with the Boston Committee. Really great to be here with everybody. A little bit about my background to start. I started in railroad operations in the Midwest, worked transportation policy for member of Congress for a time, moved over to Boston Properties, did development and life science and kind of residential mixed use in Kendall Square. and now out on my own at Fulcrum Land Infrastructure, trying to figure out ways to use commercial development to finance public infrastructure like dams, transportation, things like that. So with that out of the way, I'm going to embrace brevity here. I want to talk to you a little bit about something that we've been working on at the Boston Committee for the past 6 months that we're calling the Housing Abundance Amendment, or HAA. In essence, it's a conceptual zoning amendment calibrated to address a question that I think is on everybody's minds, which is how do we move the city of Boston from a paradigm of housing scarcity to one of housing abundance? Now, we all come at this work from different places and motivates us to engage with it. Some of us are just tired of seeing headlines like this over the years that never seem to get better. Others are fueled by personal experience with the now fourth most expensive apartment rental market in the entire United States, or looking to put down roots permanently, buy a place and find their place kind of where they want it to be, or entirely because prices have kind of skipped out of reach. Others, I think, are rightfully preoccupied with the absences that are forced upon us from the paradigm of housing scarcity. And I'm kind of talking about the family members, acquaintances, friends, potential teachers, employees, politicians, who knows what else they could be, who aren't here anymore because they had to pick up and leave due to high housing costs. And I think that really underscores the story that's told in the chart here. Folks who are leaving Boston, that you see on the green line, moving to places like Atlanta in yellow, Phoenix in orange, or Austin in black, really hanging a lantern on the fact that though the costs of the paradigm of housing scarcity are borne by everyone in the housing market on it all across the income spectrum, it's the folks who have the least every year who are paying the highest percentages of their income to hold on to a place in cities that just don't build enough. And finally, last but not least, is the influence that increasing housing cost burdens have had on, general precarity that pushes folks closer and closer to really terrible outcomes like losing their home entirely, being maybe one, lost job, medical emergency, or accident. And that rate has been increasing over the last 20 years, as you can see in Greater Boston, from 37% in 2000 to 47% in 2019. Now, all that tough news aside, I think what unites us as a committee is a real conviction that the paradigm of housing scarcity we confront here is artificial and is a policy choice, and that we can choose differently. Whether you're inspired by the chart on the left, looking across societies across the world who've made different choices and seen the benefits, as you can see the folks in blue there, or if you just look domestically at other cities who've chosen to remain open to folks from all walks of life, even while absorbing huge quantities of new residents over the decades. And I think this is another important point. We all come at this from potentially different political perspectives. For some, once housing utopia looks like what you see on the left, Viennese social housing and a lot of public, hands-on support in terms of development. For some of us, it's untrammeled, sort of private, dense urbanism like you see in the middle, Tokyo. And for some of us, it's the good old Houston townhome. In any one of these visions, the point of departure is that we have to for the construction of new housing across the city at a scale large enough to really make a difference in people's lives. And that's what led our committee to looking at Boston's antiquated zoning code as probably the primary obstruction in our vision of abundant housing. This is a chart showing the total amount of zoning variance applications in a very specific period of time in major U.S. cities. Boston tops the list at 1,800. New York, you'll notice, is less than 200. That's a city that's 13 times the population, I think about 5 times the raw size in terms of land area, and has a lot more real estate. I think this is emblematic of the fact that in this city, the default setting, too much of the time, is no. And getting exceptions every step of the way, asking many of you, many of the folks who've been here speaking on this panel, to show up and expend superhuman effort to get the housing we need, is really kind of an untenable scenario. And that's what brought us to think through what is the packet of potential policy interventions that would lead to default from going from no to yes. So these are sort of our 4, call it pillars of the Housing Abundance Amendment that we've been developing over the last few months. I'll just go through point by point briefly. briefly. Number one, eliminating costly parking mandates citywide. We've all heard about parking minimums that Cambridge successfully did remove those. We're advocating for the very same thing. Depending on where you are, this is going to cost, almost up to sometimes $100,000 to build a parking space. So this is, frankly, we view it as an unnecessary cost that artificially increases the cost of housing and nudges us away from the climate goals that we want to achieve. Two is permitting ADUs by right citywide. That facilitates, I think, more intergenerational kind of households, as well as gentle density throughout every neighborhood of the city. And then last but not least, we have the last 2 points there. Permit up to 5 stories, 60 feet residential by right citywide, and then in places adjacent to transit, up to 7 stories and 85 feet. Far from being kind of arbitrary thresholds, those are driven by 2 primary factors. One, that style of construction kind of relies on the stick-built typology that's the most affordable that we have. And second of all, it's most likely to be used by smaller developers working with smaller lots that really can't afford to take the punches from the extraordinary process that so many of us have been talking about today. So just here for reference is a rough diagram of the process for passage of something like this. Starting from the left, anybody can really propose an amendment of this kind. From there, it moves on to the BPDA board to consider it, send a report to the zoning commission, and then the zoning commission holds a public hearing on some matter. Something I want to mention too is that while the city council is not formally in here in this process loop, their support can absolutely be decisive for something like this, as well as the mayor, of course. So that's something to keep in mind when you think about what this all might be. So, holding in our minds the pillars that we just talked about, as well as the process, you might be wondering whether this is a bit of a bridge too far. And I think that we would say not at all. It's actually an eminently proportional response to the scale of housing deficit that we have. And I think part of what can kind of offer support for that notion is this wonderful material from Pew that we have here, examining a couple of municipalities in the United States that have made real headway in lowering real rents in the 2017 to 2023 time period. I won't go through each of these, but the bookends are instructive. On the low end, Portland, Oregon increased its housing stock by 7% between 2017 and 21, and then kept rent growth down to 2%. Tyson's, Virginia, on the other hand, which had population growth of like 13% in this period of time, which is wild, grew its housing stock by 23% and held rent growth down to 4%. As the U.S. as a whole, housing stock increased 3% and rents went up 31%. This tells us what scale of intervention is required in a municipality to really get the results that I think we ultimately need. And that, I think, is part of what anchors our broad citywide measures that are part of the approach that we propose in the AHMA. So, kind of winding down here, but compare those numbers from Pew with what we see here in Boston in the last 9 years. This chart shows new residential units approved by the BPDA board from 2014 to 2022. If you just take the rough percentages from the Pew data and apply it to Boston, you would estimate that we would need to produce between 21,000 and 68,000 units per year, every 4 years in Boston to have similar effects to what we saw over there. Boston permitted an average of 5,400 units per year between 2014 and 2022, so kind of at that low end of 21,000 over 4 years. And that's during a time period where we've all seen the headlines that we've just seen, we've seen the data points that we've just seen, and we're clearly all here in this room together right now. So it's probably going to be 2 to 3 times that rate that we're accustomed to doing with the current zoning architecture that we have. And as we can see in this chart, the portents are not great. At least in the last few years, we've had a real decrease in our rate of permitting. Now, market dynamics are going to influence that, but the structural issues underneath that are still there, and it's going to make the next upcycle that we have in prices and rents that much more egregious if we don't change that zoning architecture within which we are compelled to work. So with that, I think that really kind of concludes the high-level for the AHMA. As Jesse said at the beginning, do, in addition to checking out AHMA as an organization, talk to us right now if you like what you see and if you are interested in this kind of, in making this kind of change. We recognize that it's really the start of the conversation. We recognize that it requires citywide buy-in from folks everywhere who think differently to make something like this happen. But we think it's a wonderful starting point to really engage with those structural issues and to address something Becca said, to make it so that we don't have to, you know, essentially fight house to house to see the change that we need. So, thanks very much.
Quick second for our call to action here. I really appreciate everyone coming today. I want to do, so what we've heard so far is about the challenges we're really facing here in Boston in our ability to produce the affordable homes that we need for everyone in every neighborhood of the city. But we really need folks to get involved to make this happen. Our housing abundance proposal that Ian just presented is at this point a proposal. We don't have the infrastructure or yet the forces we need, as he said, to bring it to every neighborhood of the city. I want to do a little bit a very quick exercise here. I want you, if you are sitting here in this room or standing in this room and you think that we have a problem with housing affordability and our ability to create the homes that we need for everyone in every neighborhood of Boston, raise your hand. And I'm assuming that's going to be everyone in this room. Okay, keep your hand up, keep your hand up. All right, now put your hand down if you're already involved in one of our affiliate organizations like Dorchester Growing Together or WalkUp Roslindale or anything else. Okay, there's still some hands that are up who are not yet involved, and those are the people we need you to get involved with abundant housing. We need you to consider either becoming a participant or a leader. You can put your hands down now, I appreciate it. In creating new pro-housing organizations in your neighborhood. I want to point out, I am Jesse, I want to point out 3 other folks who are in the room from the AHMA staff. I see Mike Griesberg, who's right here, raising his hand, Julia Davidovitz in the back, and then next to her, Cheryl Daniel. If you are in a position to get involved in your neighborhood, whether you live in one like Dorchester or Roslindale, where we already have an organization, or you live somewhere else, East Boston, Elston Brighton, any other neighborhood in the city, and are interested in getting involved or hearing more about what it would take to be involved in your neighborhood, we have the capacity to help you become effective pro-housing advocates in your neighborhood, and we need you to step up and get involved and make this happen. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Jenn.
So that concludes our program here today. We're going to transition to like 15 minutes of networking here before the majority, whoever's going, will transition out to go to the Byrnes patio. Before you do that and get some more food, anyone who has kids in childcare, if you could get them and bring them down. And if you could stack the chairs so that when it's 15 minutes later, we can actually all go help with stacking the chairs behind Greg. Thank you so much for coming, and I'll be circulating if you have any questions about the building or